Hello guys, Jugoslavia here, and do you, yes you, remember Yugoslavia? Yeah, I'm talking about a country which existed with breaks throughout most of the 20th century, and many nations living there, such as Croats, Bosniaks, Slavians, Montenegrins, Kosovars, freaking a lot of nations. Mix up these nations in any other country and you'll probably get some ultra genocides running here and there, but in Yugoslavia it wasn't the case. At least for some time. Because this country broke up in 1991, and one of the causes of the breakup are pretty much transparent. This conflict has never been, up to that date, described in great detail. And I think it is not great because it is one of the most recent conflicts and one of the conflicts which are really hard to understand. So, long story short, here you go. What caused the conflict? We need some damn historical context, so here's some on the history of Slavs and their national awareness. We're not talking about really early years since they do not matter much. So up to the 19th century there was little to no revolutionaries, as the Balkans were controlled by the Ottomans pretty easily. But that quickly changed since the Serbian Revolution in 1805 became one of the first attempts to liberate Serbia from the Serbian port. The revolution succeeded and they were granted some extent of autonomy that lasted up until 1848. This year is a pretty big year in the world history, let alone in the Balkans history. Revolutionary ideas began to spread, the country became pretty much self-aware, and the first Pan-Slavic Congress was held in Prague. A couple of things were figured out, including the Slavic flag, which is pretty much a standard for the modern Slavic countries. The Balkan nations began their struggle for independence with help of other Slavs, and they even became independent, well, sort of. It doesn't matter much since they were captured by the Habsburg States Empire. Well, that didn't benefit them, did it? Speaking of which, it was sort of a special feature of this empire to capture regions with different populations and different ethnics. So after the World War I is over, the state of Serbs, Croats and Slovenes, that's quite an original name, was created, which then became the Empire of Serbs, Croats and Slovenes, or for the sake of time saving, Yugoslavia. During the turbulent years of interbellum, the empire was pretty much at the brink of its breakup all the time. But then the mustache-bearing artist and his little spaghetti bro said to them, knock knock. It's World War II. So Yugoslavia was split up in many parts and governors loyal to Axis were put in power here and there. Particularly the independent, how ironic, state of Croatia with their Ustaša movement. But one man appeared out of nowhere who led the partisan warfare against collaborationists. This man was Josip Broz Tito. Quite a long introduction, so let's cut it short. He cleared the lands from fascists, then put himself into power and gained enormous support from literally all the population and governed without any problems till 980 when he died. And because his death was kind of an event, here's a quick recap in a quick recap. So his mood had a lot and became really ill to the end of 1979, for his blood flow in legs decreased dramatically. He was taken to the Ljubljana hospital and diagnosed with artery-clogging. His left leg was to be amputated, but being a stubborn man he resisted. The leg was finally amputated, but it was too late. So on May the 4th, 980 at 3:05 p.m., 3 days before his 80th birthday, at the University Medical Center in Ljubljana, in the cardiovascular surgery department, on the 8th floor, in the small, most southeast corner room, Comrade Tito has died. That same day, a football match between the teams of Hajduk and Crvena Zvezda was interrupted because of that event, and the whole stadium started singing a sonic Stalin marshal. Later in the evening, all the TV sets around Yugoslavia went black for 30 seconds to announce the death. Also, for 10 years after this event, the sirens turned on all over Yugoslavia the same exact minute Tito has died. Oh. Now that was one hell of a recap. Let's finally begin. So there was a total of 6 constituent republics in Western Yugoslavia, but after the 1974 constitution, 2 more autonomous oblasts were added. Namely Serbia, Vojvodina and Serbia Kosovo, all being parts of SR Serbia prior to that constitution. The main purpose of this was to stop the Serbian nationalism, which could be devastating. So after Tito perished, the government apparently decided that 2 heads are always better than 1 and created a presidium. I'm being completely honest with you, presidium existed since 1971 and was reorganized in 1974 with the adoption of the constitution. In between those years, it consisted of 23 total deputies, 3 deputies from each republic, 2 deputies from each semi-autonomous oblast, and 1 Big J himself. Then it shortened to 9 and then to 8. So as was already, Tito died and Yugoslavia's fate was in hands of presidium. Thus, Tito was the one and only governor of Yugoslavia, and his death, of course, signified bad events which were starting to unfold. But not everything was alright in the Federative Republic. One of the big issues was his money, because it was a socialist republic. The currency of the country, the Yugoslav dinar, was inflating continuously and couldn't be stopped. Thus, the first evaluation took place on the first day of 1966 with a rate of 100 to 1. Pace of the inflation has since been really fast. 15 to 25% a year, and the death of Marshall only severed this. Yugoslavia also had a particularly big national debt, $20 billion in 1981. But although these events were kind of important, they weren't game-changing. The real is most important cause of conflict was the ethnic tension in Yugoslavia due to overall liberalization. The first somewhat serious instance of growing ethnic tension was a protest in Kosovo in April 1981. When students led a protest demanding even more autonomy for Kosovo, although some stated that their true goal was to secede from Yugoslavia and join Albania. But this problem was easily subdued by local authorities by declaring a state of emergency and allowing GNA to deal with them. In the meantime, SR Slovenia and SR Croatia wanted decentralization since they were much more developed. Meanwhile, things are heating up since in 1986 a document was made by the Serbian Academy of Arts known as the Sanu Memorandum, which main idea was that Yugoslavia was against Serbia. This was denounced by Yugoslav communists, saying it was the darkest nationalism. But some consider it to be a turning point in the breakup of Yugoslavia, and it really can be, since after that moment, the ethnic tensions only grew. We have to meet a very special personality this time, Slobodan Milosevic, who was pretty much a hardline communist. But when it was time for the protests in Kosovo to be subdued, he suddenly became really political, since he thought that Serbians outnumbered Kosovars, and help for the latter was nowhere to be seen. So Milosevic assured Serbs that their rights would be returned, and because of that he gained enormous population and had easily won the elections of 1987. He in fact was one of the most nationalist nationalists, since he openly said things like, "At home and abroad, Serbia's enemies are massing against us. We say to them, we're not afraid, we will not flinch from battle. And we Serbs will act in the interests of Serbia, whether we do it in compliance with the constitution or not, whether we do it in compliance with the law or not, whether we do it in compliance with party statutes or not." So, what does a politician do most of his time? That's right, tries to attract more electorate. So did our Serbian Tito 2.0, but his methods were a little dire. This became known as the Anti-Bureaucratic Revolution, which was in fact a series of nationwide protests. Nationwide populist campaigns started with his ascension to power, hoping to reunite Serbia. This adopted some principles, which can be best described in that sentence. Serbia was framed by the other constituent republics to suppress its power. Those escalated quickly as in April 1987 a big protest was held in the historic town of Kosovo Pole, gathering about 20k. In October of 1988, the protests were big enough to change the government of Vojvodina, with that loyal to Milosevic. They gathered around the town of Bačka Palanka and headed to Novi Sad, and by the time they arrived here, they already numbered some 150k men. The governors of Vojvodina were caught by surprise and tried to negotiate but couldn't, so they cut off water instead, but that only further enraged the protesters. The protesters were also given yogurt and bread, and enraged crowd began to throw bread and yogurt packages at the Vojvodina parliament. Because of that, the event became known as the Yogurt Revolution. Well, why would you waste bread in the communist country? I'm not even talking about yogurt. The revolution was victorious and the governors of Vojvodina were replaced with Milosevic's allies. Meanwhile, a rally held in Belgrade saw the enormous support for Milosevic as it gathered about 1 million people of November the 19th, 1988. Similar methods were used in Montenegro on 20th of August 1988. It started with protests but also escalated quickly since the state of emergency was declared on 7th of October and the government resigned 3 days later. It was time to go after the governors of Kosovo, which were replaced with these on November 1988. Well, almost without any contractions since a minor strike happened, but other than that, it was easy for Milosevic. Kosovars had to ratify the changes which stripped them out of freedoms in March 1989. With half of all entities on his side, Milosevic was sure that the League of Communists was under his full control and gave the Gazimestan Speech in June 1989 commemorating the historic Battle of Kosovo Pole. That was the peak point of Serbian nationalism. This speech extolled the country to the furthest extent possible. Milosevic also mentioned possibility of armed battles as a part of Serbian future history, which many consider, yeah, you guessed it. Milosevic even tried to rally Croats and Slovenes to be on his side, but he couldn't do that. Meanwhile, Yugoslavia was a great danger. In January 1990, 14th last and extraordinary Congress of the Communist League was held in Belgrade. Slobodan Milosevic wanted to adopt the principle of one man, one vote, which was only beneficial for Serbs. Other delegations didn't like it, but there was nothing they could do, and unable to resolve the conflict, the Slovenian delegation walked out of the Sava Center on 22nd of January 1990. They were followed by Croats, Macedonians and Bosniaks, and only Serbs and Montenegrins were left. And this signified 1. Milosevic and his allies now were actually and lawfully ruling the country. and 2, League of Communists was completely dissolved and small regional communist parties appeared. In Croatia, for example, a nationalist party, the Croatian Democratic Union, was elected. Serbs of Croatia were aware of this and plotted a revolt. They barricaded roads to the coast of Dalmatia and their de facto capital, the town of Knin. The barricades were made from fallen tree trunks, and because of that, the event became known as the Log Revolution. This event happened on August 17th, 1990. As a result, small conflicts happened and the new breakaway entity, the Serbian Autonomous Oblast of Krajina, was proclaimed. When Croats tried to stop the revolt by calling for military, the Yugoslavs said, "No, you must return to Zagreb." And it turned out to be a good way to persuade them, since Croats obliged. But it also became obvious that the Yugoslav People's Army was now largely Serb. Serbians became further enraged with the Constitution of Croatia, known as the Christmas Constitution because of the day it was adopted, which listed Serbs as minority. This is when the prelude ends and when the full-blown conflict starts. But I have to mention that Yugoslavia existed up to that point, despite being largely Serbian. Thank you guys for watching, stay tuned to notice the second part about the conflicts, and farewell.